Hey, Jackson here, and I finally did it. I finally got that Series X I've been looking for. Damn it, wrong Xbox. If any of you guys check out my community posts, you know that I recently picked up an Xbox 360. I had been contemplating it for a couple of months already, since there were videos that I wanted to make on games for the system that aren't available on modern consoles. I already had a handful of 360 games in my collection, but decided to pick a couple of others up that same day. There was Mater's Tall Tales on the Wii. That's a Wii game, so I won't be bringing it up again. I got a copy of Pac-Man World 2, since I planned to make a video on it one day. I put it in my 360, and learned that it's not backwards compatible with the console. Piracy it is, baby! That leaves us with one more plastic shell to cover, and that's LEGO Indiana Jones and Kung Fu Panda. As you can tell by just looking at the case, this isn't your standard 360 game, but a combo pack that was included in specific bundles of the 360 targeted towards families. Makes sense. LEGO games are popular with kids, and everybody loves Jablinski, so pairing these two games together isn't the craziest thing in the world. I was gonna cover each of the games separately in their own videos, but then I realized that there's already a bunch of videos about them online, so I thought, why not cover them together? Give this video a little bit of a gimmick, you know? So today, let's go over the LEGO Indiana Jones and Kung Fu Panda combo pack. See if the games in it are quality, and if it's an overall good value or not. Starting with... LEGO Indiana Jones is exactly what it sounds like. A LEGO game that adapts the events of the first 3 Indiana Jones films. It follows the basic gameplay you'd expect from a LEGO game. Go around beating up enemies, doing some platforming, and solving puzzles. Usually requiring help from a second player. Or in my case, switching to another character because I played this game alone. You do this usually because the game has a very good rock, paper, scissors mechanic, where characters have strengths and weaknesses from each other that make you need to keep switching between them while playing. It's not just a case of going, oh, I like how this character looks, so I'm going to play as them the whole game. For example, Indy has his whip, which he can use to clear platforming segments, solve puzzles, and use in combat, along with just being a good all-around character. But he has a low jump, and a phobia of snakes that stops him in place when he gets near them. Meanwhile, the female characters, which include Marion, Willie, and the blonde woman from The Last Crusade, I forgot her name, sorry, all have a higher jump that they can use to access places the bros can't, as well as making platforming easier. But in return, they aren't nearly as good in combat, mostly sticking to basic punch and kick combos, except for Willie, who has a scream she can use to hurt enemies and shatter things such as glass, but in return, has a phobia of spiders. It's very easy to understand, but makes the game surprisingly complex for what could have been just a basic kids beat 'em up. Another thing that adds depth is picking up items, which can be found in crates or from fallen foes. Some can be used in combat, such as guns and bazookas. Others can be useful for traversing the levels, such as hats from defeated enemies that you can wear in order to trick the bad guys into helping you. And some can be both, such as shovels, which you can use to dig up objects that can be helpful in completing a level, but also to give your foes the old shovel brain shuffle. Moving on to things outside of the gameplay, I also really enjoyed this game's score. Although that might just be because it's taken directly from the movies. But hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, am I right? The cutscenes were also good, although they weren't what I was expecting them to be. You see, something I learned from this game is that older LEGO games barely had voice acting, and as a result, cutscenes in them played out like silent cartoons with that classic LEGO sense of humor. Now, was this done to save money on voice actors? Oh, absolutely. This game only has 3, and they just speak in grunts the entire time. Is the humor a little cringe? Kinda. But I overall found them to be really cute and charming. Although I'm not complaining that they switched to full-on voice acting down the road. Not saying that I prefer it or anything, I just legitimately have no preference between the two. Sorry to break it to you guys, but I don't really play LEGO games for the plot. While I thought that the game was overall pretty fun, there were still a couple of things that bothered me. You might consider these nitpicks, but I still feel like talking about them. Enemies with guns. Very annoying. It feels like whenever they appear, they're always away from me. And since they're shooting at me, I have to go towards them immediately, and 9 times out of 10, they end up killing me before I reach them. It's especially annoying when they have a rocket launcher or are in a tank since it's an insta-kill. I also felt that there were some times that the game wouldn't do the best job at communicating how you're supposed to solve a problem. Although I only experienced it, I want to say a handful of times. The example that immediately comes to mind is in one of the levels based on Temple of Doom. There's this machine that the player needs to fix in order to progress, but in order to do so, they must get a box full of parts and carry it over to the machine. Sounds simple, right? But in order to get to the machine, the player must get over this gap that's impossible for Indy to cross with the added weight of the parts. I tried jumping at the very edge of the platform, which didn't work. I then tried switching to Willy, since like I mentioned earlier, she can jump higher than he can, but that also didn't work. So then I decided to accept defeat and just look it up online, and the way you're supposed to do it is so stupid. So, switch to Indy, pick up the box of parts, walk to the edge, then drop it. Now, jump over to the next platform and use your whip to hit the box, and it'll automatically get into your arms. I know it sounds like a very stupid thing to complain about, but this is the only time in the entire game where you're required to do something like this in order to progress. Despite those very small complaints, like I said earlier, you can consider them just nitpicks or me having a skill issue, I really liked LEGO Indiana Jones. A lot more than I thought I would. Not saying that I thought it would be bad, just a pretty average kid's game. And while the game has an extremely similar setup to one, it has surprisingly deep mechanics that are also pretty simple to understand. I would heavily recommend it, especially if you're a fan of the movies. I mean, it's not like you got a lot of options for a good Indiana Jones game. LEGO Indy is getting a 9 out of 10. It's that good. Now, let's move on to the funny Jack Black Panda. As you'd expect from the name, Kung Fu Panda is heavily based around combat. The levels consist of the player platforming, beating up enemies, and collecting coins along the way to upgrade Po's moves. He has your standard light and heavy attacks, as well as aerial and running attacks. But he also has special moves the game calls Panda techniques that he can only use when he has enough chi, which is the blue stuff that you can see in the HUD. These moves include a belly flop, which does exactly what you'd expect it to, as well as the ability to roll into a ball, which insta-kills pretty much 90% of the game's enemies. Despite that though, I actually found combat in the game to be pretty solid. It's not a particularly challenging game. This is no Panda May Cry. You're still going to have to actually try to defeat enemies, not just button mash your way to victory, especially in the later half of the game. But most importantly, the combat is just fun. The animations and sound design make it feel oh so satisfying to skadoosh all over your foes. You don't just play as Po though. I did not mean for that to rhyme. There's also times where the player switches to other characters, including Tigress, Crane, Monkey, and Master Shifu, who's the most fleshed out of the 4. Since the player will switch to him for entire levels, compared to the other 3, who you play as for only very brief moments. His gameplay is pretty similar to Po's, but he also has his own unique moves, mainly when it comes to his own panda techniques. There's one move he can do that homes in on enemies similar to Sonic's homing attack, and another move I like to call the Shifu boost, where he sprints quickly and hurts any enemies in his path, similar to Sonic's boost. The plot of the game is pretty similar to that of the film. but takes several creative liberties to fit the medium of video games better and to extend the game's runtime. Some of these are minor, such as when Po and Shifu train at the place where Master Oogway created Kung Fu. In the movie, we get a training montage where Po slowly becomes better at Kung Fu, while in the game, a gang of gorillas starts raiding the place for treasure, and Po and Shifu team up to take them out. A more major change would be after Po completes his training. He and Shifu go their separate ways. Shifu goes off to rescue the five after they get their asses whooped by Tai Lung like in the movie, and Po tries to make his way back to the Jade Palace, where he accidentally gets lost and comes across both the Wu sisters, a group of criminals made specifically for this game, as well as Tai Lung, who he meets for the first time at his training grounds in the middle of a desert. I really like that the game did this, not only because it puts a unique spin on the plot of the movie that's so well known at this point, but also because the characters and locations we're introduced to are really cool. I especially like the swamp Po goes to when he fights the Croc Gang, as well as Tai Lung's training grounds. As much as I liked Kung Fu Panda, there were definitely some flaws I noticed with the game as I played it. Much like LEGO Indie, it's a very small list of issues, but they were a lot bigger than the ones in the former. For one, the graphics. You might think that that's kinda weird to say, because judging by all the gameplay footage you've seen so far, you'd say this is a pretty solid game in terms of visuals. And while overall I do agree, I think that the cutscenes are when the graphics for the game are at their worst. This is because during cutscenes we get a closer look at the character models, and they don't look the best. This was probably because the game was also released for the Wii, so they had to keep the hardware limitations for that in mind, and as a result, they kinda dip into that uncanny valley territory. Seriously, look at Shifu's teeth. Ew. Another complaint I have, this time about the gameplay itself, is that it has QuickTime events. Yay! These were super annoying and came completely out of nowhere every time they happened. They're not even that hard, I just kept pausing the game during them and got them right every single time. Well, almost every single time. I'm so happy that QuickTime events have slowly been dying out ever since the 7th generation. The only time they were somewhat enjoyable for me was in Sonic Frontiers, and that's because the only button you push during them is the X button, and even then, they could still easily be cheesed. Now that I think of it, I think I've mentioned Sonic a little bit too much in this video, haven't I? While I do consider it the weaker game of the two, Kung Fu Panda is still a very fun game, and much like Indie, is something I'd recommend to anyone who's a fan of the films. It's up there with Cars as one of the best movie tie-in games I've ever played, and it gets the same score as well, 8 out of 10. And with that, I've now covered both games in this double pack, and if the video hasn't made it obvious yet, I think it's a pretty sweet deal. It contains two games that I think are great, not only for kids, but all ages, and especially fans of their source material. And I think that it's a great introduction for kids to the 360 as a console. I mean, it was mine as well. These were the first games I ever played on mine alongside Sonic 06. So in conclusion, I have an Xbox 360 now, and I'm really enjoying it so far. The videos I plan to make with the system might not come out for a little while, considering that I have the rest of the year planned out for this channel, but I promise you I will make a return on this investment. I mean, I kinda have to. I bought the damn thing thinking that it was a Series X. Ha.